So we have, as you can see, we have this special device that has the 360 degrees of the room, which would be a lot more useful if there were lots of people here. But since it's only me, it's not actually that useful. But so we're using what's called an owl. And what I'd like to do before we even begin is have everybody say their name one after the other. Just introduce themselves. So Ruby Hilker is joining too, and I'll send her. So I guess you have all your names there, so we don't need to do that. And you probably know most of each other. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Okay.
Just give me 1 second as I send it to Ruby as well. But she has the materials since they didn't work. Let's see, Ruby. And Cindy is joining too. Wow, we have a nice group. Okay. Cindy.
I haven't gotten mine.
Rabbi, here it is.
Online. I got the email. Yeah, I have it.
Okay. So apparently the link with the materials did not work. So I'm just sending to everybody the materials by email. I'm just looking to see everybody who I can see online. And maybe one of you could share a screen when we get to it. We're going to begin. And welcome. This is the beginning of a whole year-long journey that we've been imagining for the last 6 months, or maybe even year and a half. David Schwartz and I were talking about this a year and a half ago. We wanted to do a whole year on prayer. And we wanted to explore every part of it, not just the mechanics and the informational, but also we wanted to talk about the whys, and even go deeper than that and talk about why we have this crisis of prayer in our synagogues, where prayer is difficult and not as alive as we'd like it to be. And we're going to read that first text by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. We talked about it, 50, 60 years ago, and I don't think it's changed that much. But we wanted to give something that was comprehensive and that touched on all the different elements. And just to introduce why prayer is so important to me and why I think it's, so important to all of our congregations. I mean, if you look at our synagogue here in River Forest, if anybody's on Facebook, then you might not know where we are, but how much of our building is taken up by our sanctuary? A lot, right? Prayer is the center of what happens in the sanctuary. You could have a synagogue and not have other events going on. And if you still have prayer, it could still be called a synagogue. But if you have a synagogue and there's no prayer going on, I'm not sure you can call that a synagogue. And so prayer really is central to everything we do here. It's not the only thing, but it's central to all we do. And we sometimes forget, because we do it so often and we do it with these books and we have this whole way of doing it, how amazing the very idea of prayer is. That somehow we're able, and I've used this language before, tiny human beings that we are, from where we are, to reach across the chasm and literally contact the consciousness that binds all of life together, the whole universe. I mean, it's a powerful and crazy idea. And even more that consciousness, we're nothing, we're like an ant compared to it, nothing, is interested in hearing what we have to say and think. And so prayer is such an old human practice. I imagine it going back to the very beginning, the dawn of time, the human beings are reaching out to that consciousness and asking and pleading and being grateful. And in our synagogues, maybe over the last 80 years or 90 years, and maybe it goes back 150 years, prayer has become one of the challenges of modern Jewish communities. And there's plain and very good reasons for that. One is we're using prayer books that are difficult to use. They're very thick. They have a lot of material in them, and they include so many different things: quotes from the Torah, quotes from other parts from the Tanakh, quotes from medieval poets, different And they all presuppose that we know every other one at the same time, which is very, very challenging if we don't know all of it. And it'd be like reading an English text, which not only includes Shakespeare, but has Shakespeare and Chaucer next to each other, speaking to each other, and something even older and modern English all together. So imagine trying to read that and making sense of that. It would be very difficult. And that's kind of where our Siddur, what our prayer book is like. It has many different prayers, all coming from different cultures, different parts of the world, different periods, and all included together in this beautiful book that we have. Now, there is a reason we use it, even though it's so old and so eclectic and has so many different parts. And that is because it's not always easy to find our own words for prayer. And even if we found our own words, we wouldn't be able to pray together. If I'm praying my own words and you're praying your own words and that person's praying their own words, it's all cacophony. We can't pray together. So what do we use? We use a prayer book to pray together. And there's even something more to that. We believed a lot of these prayers, and not only the prayers, but the way they were put together, that they were put together in a state of inspiration. That someone at some point had some kind of, was moved at a very big degree to experience something, a moment of gratitude, a moment of praise. And that was so powerful to them, they wrote it down however they could using their poetic language. And so we believe that when you reread that poem, you're accessing that experience that they had, right? It's the same with music at some degree, with art, with poetry. If you're able to go into it, you can actually access the experience of the person who had that, who wrote that prayer. And so, in the end, even though our prayer books are old and our prayer books are ancient and they can have so many different images, they're also expressing something very fundamental to us as human beings. They aren't that different maybe across the millennia, expressing gratitude, expressing fear and the need for protection, expressing awe, expressing praise, a plea. And I sometimes like to think, well, we think that the Siddur was just put together, or some person said, well, let me put this one and that one and this one and that one. But actually it works a little bit like a process of elimination. So you can imagine that prayers that people liked, those survived. Prayers that people did not like, they were voted out of the Siddur. So in the end, what we have is actually the best of thousands of years of prayers. And it's put together in a way that's a little bit complicated, which is one of the reasons it's hard to access. But we have something that has grassroots popularity, i.e. they work. These prayers work, and they've worked for a very long time. The way Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who is the head of the renewal movement, the way he describes it, is he says that prayer is like freeze-dried coffee. I've used this image before. So like I said, somebody had an experience. The psalmist who wrote the Ashrei had an experience and wrote Ashrei, King David or whoever it was. And then that Ashrei is like freeze-dried coffee. It's frozen in time, and all you have to do is bring your hot water, and there you got your coffee. And that's the way we understand it. So it's a little bit more complicated than that, because you can't just bring your hot water, right? You have to also bring a little bit of sweetener, and your hot water has got to be hot, and you've got to mix it well. And so there are complicating elements for all of us with Jewish prayer, because if you're just there and you're wondering, where am I and what's going on and what's this saying, you grow frustrated, how can you be drinking your coffee or enjoying something sweet? And the other thing is also, one of the reasons that we pray is that our prayers become like roads that we've been on before. And just like we all like taking walks around the same walks, maybe not every day, but very often, because they bring us a sense of regularity, of comfort. So prayers are somewhat the same. And they're old familiar roads that we've been on before, roads that maybe our family members have been on before. It's almost like we can meet them when we're going on these prayer journeys. We can meet old friends and meet old family members and meet Jews from old generations. And they're comforting, because they've been there forever. And maybe more than anything, we know these roads work. We know on these roads, you're going to see sights that are going to make us feel certain things that will connect us as Jews to our faith, to our people, to other Jews. And they're alive. Not every road is the same. So what we're going to be doing in this course is trying to provide some of the tools and inspirations to make these journeys easier to navigate, to make them inspiring, to make them journeys that we can walk on together, and for all of us to be able to connect a little bit more to our prayers and to our services. So there's our Hebrew component twice a month. Courtney is teaching Hebrew. Then we have David Schwartz is teaching the individual prayers and how to connect to them. Cantor Figa is teaching the music of not only certain parts of our service, but also life cycle events. I think that should be really fascinating. And I'll be teaching the big ideas. Big ideas are, what do you do when you're praying and you read this prayer and you think, this prayer makes no sense to me. I don't believe that. What do I do with this? I'm sure we've all been there. Or I'm tired of praising. The same idea keeps coming over and over. Or why pray in a group? Why not just pray alone? And how do I find my own voice? Sometimes when the sanctuary is filled of the voice of others, we don't feel like we have to hear our own voice. But how do we bring our own voice to the fore? Because I often think in Jewish prayer, hearing our own davening voice, finding our own davening voice is one of the most important yet challenging parts of all of it. And to go back one last time before we're going to do a few other things, to say it's not easy. And I just want to acknowledge that. I think it's really important for Jewish leaders to say that Jewish prayer is not easy. And I've known many people who have not been in shul for 10 years, and suddenly they walk into shul and it's overwhelming. Somebody's offering them an honor. They have no idea where they are. There's Hebrew this way, the melodies, and they just want to run away instead of going. It's difficult. And even people who've been doing it for 40 years, sometimes it just doesn't bring meaning to them. There isn't that spark. And I think more than anything for me, what my part of the course is about is helping us also to find that spark. Because if you have that spark in your prayer, all the challenges kind of melt away a little bit. You need to have a basis. But if you can find that spark and prayer becomes alive for you and gives you something, then you're going to want to do it again. Because when you receive from anything, you want to do it again. But if you go to it and it's empty, you've got to have a lot of dedication to keep coming to it again and again and again. And I think that spark is really what's missing the most, and why we have a prayer crisis in our synagogues, because we've lost that spark. And once you've lost that spark, you forget it ever was there in the first place. There's this wonderful story about the Baal Shem Tov, the Baal Shem Tov used to go, the founder of Hasidism, used to go pray in a forest somewhere with his Hasidim, and used to have amazing experiences. So then the generation after the Baal Shem Tov, they used to go to the same place, but he wasn't there, and it wasn't quite as amazing, but it was still powerful. And then the generation after that remember that people used to go to the forest, and that something happened in the forest, and that there was powerful prayer. And then the generation after that even forgot that anybody ever went to the forest, that anything ever happened. So that's how quickly we lose track of what's alive and what's powerful. And so we need to keep bringing that spark back to the fore, and keep bringing it up. So we have just a last little informational piece. If you go to our website, you'll find more information about all of it. I did a little bit of a short introduction today, but if you want to hear more, I gave my Rosh Hashanah Day 2 sermon on it, and that's available on the website or on our YouTube channel. This is how advanced we're all getting, and we have YouTube channels and Facebook Live posts, and so we're all moving ahead in this technology piece thanks to the pandemic. So thank you all for joining me again. And now what I'd like to do is go back to this idea of our crisis in our synagogues. And we're going to go back to a really important text. And so I'm seeing there's some people here who haven't received the packet. Put up your hand if you have received the packet. If not, I'm going to send it to you.
if we have.
If you have, yeah. So I'm going to send it to Kay, and I'll send it to Brian. I think everybody else has received it. I sent an email.
Hindra hasn't.
You haven't, Hinda? Okay, I'll send it to you quickly so you have it. Let's see. Okay. It'll take me 1 minute. Ed, are you able to share screen? Because maybe we can just put up on the screen also.
Rabbi, I haven't received it either.
Okay, I'll send it to you, Cindy. Okay, Cynthia Klein. Okay, Greenfield.
The 2 pages, right, Rabbi?
It is.
Okay.
Kay, what is your email address? You're on mute.
Mine,
Yes.
kay.greenfield@gmail.com.
Greenfield@gmail.com. And
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm sending it. You all should have received an email from me. And we're going to read our first text. And Ed, I don't know if you're able to, but if you can share it on screen, or that would be really appreciated. So we're going to go to our first text by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel came from a noted Hasidic dynasty in the old country. But then he had a secular Jewish education as well. He went to university and got a PhD in philosophy, I believe, and had both that deep rootedness and the most spiritual and mystical of Jewish traditions, but also a wide open view to modern life. And that's why he became in our conservative movement, because JTS took him on as a teacher. He became probably our most noted, to this day, voice for bringing more depth, more spirituality, more connectedness to all of our conservative movement. And he also was famous, of course, for his social justice work, praying with his feet, walking with Dr. King. I always think that Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel was a voice that was so important within our movement, but we didn't listen to him. And if we'd listened to him, we would be in a really good shape now, but we did not listen to his message. So we're going to see now a speech that he gave in 1958, and we'll see how, in my mind at least, how still applicable it is in our day. Alan, do you mind reading for us?
Sure. The Spirit of Jewish Prayer, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Our services are conducted with pomp and precision. The rendition of the liturgy is smooth. Everything is present: decorum, voice, ceremony. But one thing is missing: life. One knows in advance what will ensue. There will be no surprise, no adventure of the soul. There will be no sudden burst of devotion. Nothing is going to happen to the soul. Nothing unpredictable must happen to the person who prays. He will attain no insight into the words he reads. He will attain no new perspective for the life he lives. Has the synagogue become the graveyard where prayer is buried? Are we, the spiritual leaders of American Jewry, members of a Chevra Kadisha? There are many who labor in the vineyard of oratory, but who knows how to pray or how to inspire others to pray? There are many who can execute and display magnificent fireworks, but who knows how to handle a spark in the darkness of a soul? The modern synagogue offers the modern synagogue suffers from a severe cold. Our congregants preserve a respectful distance between the Siddur and themselves. They say the words, "Forgive us, for we have sinned." But of course, they are not men. They say, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, in lofty detachment, in complete anonymity, as if giving an impartial opinion about an irrelevant question." An air of tranquility, complacency prevails in our synagogues. What can come out of such an atmosphere? The services are prim, the voice is dry, the synagogue is clean and tidy, and the soul of prayer lies in agony. You know, no one will scream, no one will cry. The words will be stillborn. The problem is not how to fill the buildings, but how to inspire the hearts. And this is a problem to which techniques of child psychology can hardly be applied. The problem is not one of synagogue attendance, but of spiritual attendance. The problem is not how to attract bodies to enter the space of a temple, but how to inspire souls to enter an hour of spiritual concentration in the presence of God. The problem is time, not space. Prayer is the microcosm of the soul. It is the whole soul in one moment, the quintessence of all our acts, the climax of all our thoughts. It rises as high as our thoughts. Now, if Torah is nothing but national literature of Jewish people, if the mystery of revelation is discarded as superstition, then prayer is hardly more than a soliloquy. If God does not have power to speak to us, how should we possess the power to speak to him? Thus, prayer is a part of a greater issue. It depends upon the total spiritual situation of man and upon a mind upon which God is at home. Of course, if our lives are too barren to bring forth the spirit of worship, if all our thoughts and anxieties do not contain enough spiritual substance to be distilled into prayer, an inner transformation is a matter of urgency. And such an emergency we face today. The issue of prayer is not prayer. The issue of prayer is God. One cannot pray unless he has faith in his own ability to accost the infinite, merciful, eternal God.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you please take off the share screen? Thank you. So any thoughts or comments or reactions to that reading? Many of us have seen parts of that, but not all of it, but it's so powerful. It's in its entirety.
The amazing thing is that was 1958 and this is 2021 and it could be written today.
It could be written today, right?
Yeah.
Even more so, what struck me, we do, not only do we have this emergency about prayer, we have an emergency about attendance, physical attendance. So it's gotten worse since he wrote. He didn't seem to have a problem with getting people in the doors. We do.
That's true. At his time, people were coming into the doors. And maybe, I mean, I like to think that because they couldn't solve this prayer emergency, people stopped coming because it wasn't giving them what they wanted. And anybody else, how this struck you?
Well, I think the issue of it being a rote kind of experience, there's nothing unpredictable about it. There's nothing nothing new under the sun. In which case it's kind of like just repeating and repeating and repeating. And the thing I'm struck by is that our new prayer book, I think, has possibilities for doing alternative prayers, or things that are kind of surprising at times. That there are readings that occasionally I've gone off to read these things on the side, and that they're inspirational.
Mhm. I think the new prayer books help on many levels. One is the transliteration, which helps people, and they have, as you said, prayers. And one of the reasons we do our musical Shabbats, if you haven't been to them, I really encourage you to come. We really worked hard at them, is because we don't like them to be, we don't want them to be performative. They're not performative. They're very inclusive. They're about bringing you into a prayer experience, because I think our musical Friday night services do some of this work, help people. It's not predictable. It will, emotions come up that weren't there before, and that kind of will take you in different directions. And if you have, and I really try and bring a spirit of kavanah into it. And I think we do, and of intentionality. And go ahead, Lynn.
I can read the Hebrew. I can't translate it. And while everyone else is singing and praying in Hebrew, I'm reading the English. I want to know what I'm saying to God. But
Yeah.
sometimes I wonder, they say his eye is on the sparrow. Why should he listen to me? I'm so insignificant. However, I have literally, maybe it's my imagination, felt the presence of God. I really have, in many, many instances. The strongest, of course, is at the cross. But it's something I have felt. And to me, being able to read it in English is very important, because just mouthing Hebrew means nothing to me. I don't know how everybody else feels.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And I, many people don't notice, but in the Jewish law says you can pray almost every single prayer except for the Shema and the beginning of the Amidah in English, in the language that makes sense to you. And there's something about singing together in Hebrew, but we'll talk about this more in a few minutes. I think English is great if that helps you soar. And really, that sense of connection and a presence, in my mind, if you've got that, you've accomplished the main goals of prayer. Anybody else before we continue on? Okay, go ahead.
So, it's one thing to pray in shul. You're reciting words either in English or in Hebrew, but I think that maybe other people share my experience when I'm in an urgent situation. If someone I love is in danger, or if somebody's having a health crisis, or even if something wonderful happens to me, I have no trouble praying immediately with real urgency. And I think, as the old saying goes, there are no atheists in foxholes. I think that, if all of us were immediately put into some kind of situation where terrorists were coming to the temple, I think we could all pick up an immediate conversation with God and pray for our lives or our safety or something. I think it's very difficult to translate that into prayer every day. But I think if you've ever had that feeling, I think that you want to capture that urgent feeling when you're praying.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. And I think that's so true. And also, when it says about spirituality in general, that you can't, it's transmitted, right? You catch it from others, or you do this. You can't somehow just make it appear out of some technique, but it comes from God. But then if you're in a room where many other people are feeling it, then suddenly you will feel it more. If you're in a room where everybody's feeling it, it helps. And when nobody's feeling it, it's very hard to feel it unless you're really on fire. And one of my goals with this whole year-long course is I hope that everybody who participates when they get to shul, will kind of be praying and looking at each other out of the corner of the eye and say, let's make this happen. Let's bring a little spark into what we're doing here together. I think that's a communal prayer also takes it from only individual responsibility to a communal sense. And I think that if a lot of people, including the people leading it, and all of us are really full of life, then it will translate to whatever sanctuary we're in on some level, help bring it all together. Anybody else have? I saw Judy. I thought you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, if you don't mind going back to the musical Shabbat stuff.
Yeah.
Years and years ago in Cantor Brindell days, there was a choir for the High Holy Days. And I miss that so much. So I really think that it makes sense to bring, because there's a immediacy with music that you don't get just with voice. Like yesterday we went to see Fanny, is that the name of it?
Yeah.
At the Goodman. And it's a musical thing about a sharecropper who worked in Mississippi for voting rights. And it was musical, and it was incredibly moving when she was singing.
Beautiful, thank you. It makes a big difference, and if there's some synagogues where there's a lot of singing and everybody's singing, or there's a lot of people, or even when we're all in high holidays and we're singing, one of the tunes that Rosh Hashanah, right? So we're all singing together, you feel transported, right? You're all kind of all together. And that's part of what we're trying to do. We're trying to get to that sense of being all together, transported. And music helps, right? In the temple, according to Maimonides, at least there were 30,000 Levites in choir. That creates a lot of music. That must have sounded pretty beautiful if that's how it was, even if it's a little bit exaggerated.
Well, yesterday we were at a memorial service for a neighbor of ours who passed away, and the pastor invited everyone to join in the singing part when they did Amazing Grace. And there were over 200 people there, and it was interesting how that changed the whole feeling of the memorial service. It was like everybody was connected.
Beautiful, exactly. The singing, and especially singing when there's spirit behind it, really does something so special.
Rabbi,
yeah.
One of the reasons I enjoy the music so much,
yes,
is how much the cantor enjoys the music, and he imparts that to me, and he had taught my grandson. And when my grandson would get up there and go, Vishamru, it was so meaningful. But the cantor enjoys himself so much. And I find myself walking around singing Le Col d'Odi. But it was after about 3 or 4 coming to services that I realized which piece I was humming. And it's just, I find the music is wonderful because of how it's presented. And I am always very interested in your sermons. I find I can relate to them. I know many people get up and walk out when sermon time comes. I don't. They're very interesting.
Well, thank you. We recorded that, so I'll have to keep that for posterity. Thank you. I think we do okay, but Hinda just wrote in the chat. There might have been other chats before, but I wasn't able to see them. But Hinda wrote, the service is too quiet, and I don't feel kavanah anymore. And I do think that Jewish prayer is a unique thing. We don't pray like other people. I guess every faith has its own mode. But Jewish prayer, a lot of it's about a prayer voice you have within yourself. And I think that was lost at some point in the as Jews became more modern. But that hum of your own prayer, if everybody in the sanctuary hummed whatever they did. I remember once being in Jerusalem and the person leading the service was completely tone deaf. But he said, we're all going to hum in our own way. And he did it to some kind of jazzy melody. That was as far as he could do. And he was like, doing it to a jazzy melody, but everybody was doing their own thing. But there was this beautiful sense of we're all part of creating humming together. And that when we're all humming, even if it's not singing together, there's moments for that. But in between, we should be saying and humming and hearing our own voice and moving, because one of the ways we navigate a 2-hour service is you have to navigate your experience. And part of that is you have to keep the flow going. And by speaking, we'll be talking about all of this, but by speaking, by humming, by hearing your own davening voice, I have a whole class coming up on how to hear the voice within you that's praying, how to hear your own davening voice, and then how to express it. Because if you can express the voice within you and bring it out and have it join the hum, it's hard, it's very intimidating for some people, but once you got it, first of all, it makes you feel like you own your own Jewish prayer life, and second of all, you're contributing to the whole room. And I think it's so important. Our sanctuary has to be full of voices. It doesn't always have to be full of sound, because sometimes just spirit can make it feel very full too. And that's also about what's going on. So we don't have that much time left. What I'd like to do is go forward to an exercise that I often do to begin any prayer course. And I like us to talk about the opportunities or the goals and the challenges of prayer. So if I were to ask you, what are the goals of Jewish prayer? What are they? What are the goals of Jewish prayer?
To feel connected to God.
Okay, feel connected to God, definitely.
To feel connected to one another.
To feel connected to one another, definitely. The whole idea of dominion, a very big part of Jewish prayer.
To reflect on your life.
Go ahead, say again, Barb.
I said to reflect on your life in the past week.
Yeah, the verb to pray in Hebrew, hitpalel, is reflexive. It's something you do to yourself. Keeping the Jewish community cohesive. Marshall, beautiful, right? If we're all praying the same thing, the same ideas, the same melodies are going through our head, and it's like we're all part of something and it links us together. There's a cohesion. You can walk into a synagogue in Bombay and you're going to recognize a lot of the prayers. That's amazing. And so there's a cohesiveness that comes from everybody praying. Somebody else was about to say something.
The recognition of where you are in time, knowing what day it is for the daily minyan, knowing it's Shabbat, knowing that it's Rosh Chodesh, knowing it's the New Year, knowing it's a holiday, all that. Mm-hmm.
So that connects you to a different calendar, connects us to our Jewish calendar, and the little changes in our liturgy, especially when you're a regular at services, you hear them and it helps you. It's a journeys that were composed to also take your soul on different journeys and to connect you to something that's beyond just the movements of our fast-paced society. Beautiful. Anybody else?
How about also to pass it on, as a model to our children?
Yeah, it connects us generation to generation to our tradition. So
like you talked about the forest.
Yeah, exactly, the forest. And so we often say in Christianity, for example, they have a creed, right? And they know what they believe. Jews don't have a creed, but we have our prayer book. Our prayer book is our creed. You read the book and it tells you what to believe. It fills your mind with images, redemption, crossing the sea, our patriarchs, our matriarchs. We don't have to believe it, but it fills our mind with stuff and it connects us to the images behind it. And maybe just to go back to the image, I like to share sometimes. Go ahead. You go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say it's one thing that's really interesting if you look at the blessings that you can say daily that are outside of the liturgy. If you're a traditional Jewish child, you need to know, where does a strawberry come from before you eat it? You need to know the right blessing so it connects you to nature. You need what comes from the earth, what comes from a tree. And somebody said to me one time, Judaism is not really connected to nature. And I said, oh, here are multiple examples from the blessings that are available from the traditional prayer book that absolutely connect people to creation. And, I would argue that many Christians don't even know or don't pay attention to it. So it's like, that's another thing, that all of nature is so involved in so many of the blessings.
Beautiful, right? Very, very true. The blessings are part of prayer, and we're supposed to say 100 blessings every day. And we have blessings for seeing a beautiful rainbow. We have blessings for seeing the sea. We have blessings for smelling beautiful scents. And so it also connects us to the great web of life. And so, Elizabeth, right, the Shema is like the creed of Judaism. There was a message before from Ruby, but it got cut off because I'm not next to the computer itself. Can somebody read it for me, Ruby's message in the chat?
Unfortunately, I have no audio or video on my desktop, so need to resort to the chat function. I too have felt the presence of God many times in the sanctuary. Harvey Gross, may he rest in peace, and I used to call these bullseye moments. Unfortunately, this has not happened for quite a while, and this lack of connection has been exacerbated lately in light of the issues with my newest granddaughter, Elise, and I wonder how to get that back.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And all I can say is, pray. It sounds counterintuitive, but I would say in those moments, just that thought of feeling we want that back, I think does much of the work of getting it back. Because if you want it and you pray to God for it, I think one has to take, and sometimes one has to argue with God, right? Abraham argues with God. Sometimes you have to argue with God and say, be angry at God, even if you have to, but to bring it all in prayer. And one of the Hasidic modes of prayer is to go into the forest. It's called Hitbodedut, and to pray, to just pour your heart out to God. And I'll also say that in general, in spiritual life, one cannot always see where we are, right? You can't see where you are. And sometimes you think you can't feel anything, you have no bullseye moments, you can't feel it, but really you're just gathering a wave. And eventually the wave will take you up there and you'll have one of the biggest moments you've ever had. So in general, in spiritual life, I think one has to keep on working and keep on praying and have faith that something is building sometimes behind it. If one thing doesn't work, one can also try different things, try different prayers, try different melodies, and let go and to let go sometimes of, there's times where we argue with God, and there's times where we have to put aside the arguing and saying, well, is our arguing with God in the moment of prayer taking us away from the connection? And if we spoke those words silently within our soul, would the connection become alive and peace would flow in? I think we just have to try different things. But I'm happy. I think that's a very deep question. I really thank you for sharing that. I'd like to move on now for a second to challenges of prayer. What are the challenges of Jewish prayer?
Hebrew.
Not just Hebrew. There's biblical Hebrew, there's Mishnaic Hebrew, there's Aramaic, there's medieval Hebrew. There's so much Hebrew in it. And we preserve the Hebrew in the conservative movement because we feel the Hebrew has a certain power to it. And also Hebrew is the language that links Jews around the world. And once you stop praying in Hebrew, you lose even more touch with Hebrew. And Hebrew is the language that links Jews across centuries, across the world. So we're not so quick to give up on Hebrew. But what do you do? As Lynn was saying, you could, even if you know how to read it well, but you don't understand it, I think what you do is you pray in English. And you don't pray in English, you don't say it, but as Reb Zalman, he's the one who intuited this, you chant it with the same melody in English. That's why we started doing this for Nishmat Kochai and our services or the cantor, right? The Shema Koleinu during the high holidays. Hear our voice, Adonai, our God. And if you chant it with a melody in the English, then you bring the power of the melody into it. Somehow it makes it much more alive. And so I think, if it's in Hebrew, even though the Hebrew is a challenge, you just have to, it's really difficult, but sometimes you go into the English and you read the English, sometimes you chant the English, sometimes you sing in the Hebrew because the Hebrew is meaningful. And even for me, who understands the Hebrew, there's so much Hebrew, sometimes I'm chanting the Hebrew and just hearing the sound of my words brings me a spiritual effect, even though I'm not thinking about the meaning one bit. I'm not thinking about the Hebrew one bit, I'm just chanting it, maybe behind there's something going on in my mind, but I'm not thinking about the meaning, but just the sound of the chanting, the movement of it brings me something. What are the other challenges of Jewish prayer?
Well, I think to go on, expand on that a bit, is like, what do I pay attention to? Do I pay attention to pronouncing the Hebrew? Do I pay attention to the melody? Do I pay attention to English meaning? Do I pay attention to how I'm feeling? Do I pay attention to others around me? It's like, you know, your mind is being pulled in so many directions at one time.
Thank you. You're right. There's a lot that's pulling us in every direction in prayer, part of it is because it's going very fast, right? It's going because we have so much to get through. The service is going very fast. Because the service is going very fast, you have to manage your internal. Well, what do I focus on? The Hebrew, the English? Do I spend a little bit of time focusing on one line of Hebrew, or do I just keep up and with the speed of going through the prayers? It's a lot to try and manage. And I think when you're feeling overwhelmed, which can easily happen, when one is feeling overwhelmed in the service, it's better to just focus on something that one feels meaningful. And something I talk about a lot is owning at least a few prayers in the service. If you own a few prayers, as in these prayers, you feel them in your kishkas and you know them, then the rest of the service doesn't matter as much. If the Shema and the Amidah are alive for you as individually, and you can go through them, and this is part of what we're doing in this course, then it doesn't matter if the rest of it is a little bit challenging, or if the rest of it is you're not keeping up. If you're feeling overwhelmed, I would say just go back to what you know and focus on it and think about that, and then feel free to join in, or find a moment where the singing is suddenly gripping you and go with the singing.
What Marshall wrote was really amazing too, to pray even when you don't feel like praying. That is so important.
Well, there's a part of prayer that's a practice, and like anything you practice, you have to keep doing it whether you feel like it or not. And the more you do it, the more it becomes part of you, and you build on it, and it's something you do again and again. I think it's really true. I remember being in a class with Rabbi Elliot Dorff, and Rabbi Elliot Dorff, one of the great teachers of the conservative movement. And he often speaks about prayer like baseball. And he says, you can't hit a home run every time. And he says you can't even hit a single every time. But that's where I disagree respectfully with Rabbi Dorff. I think one can hit a single or a double or a triple even every time. I've seen it. It's possible. I think it's what we were reading before with Heschel, that our synagogues have become a graveyard for prayer. So we're like, okay, I'm okay with just a single every 4 times I'm praying. No, I don't believe that that's the way it can be. I believe that if you do it, if everything is working, every time can be at least a single or a double or a triple, even a home run. I think you can even hit a home run every single time. It just is part of a whole way of looking at it. Anybody else? Challenges of Hebrew. Nobody spoke of length yet. Right, we have a long service, and our high holiday services, forget about it.
Well, the Musaf service, boy, I'll tell you, it's kind of like coming around again. Deja vu. What?
Yeah.
So I remember once being a part of an interfaith program, and it was Jews, Muslims, and Christians for a whole week, clergy taking each other to our services and to our this, and and one of the days the Muslims took us to the mosque, and it was Erev Ramadan. We're like, wow, this is going to be a long service, the day before Ramadan. We get there, it's a 15-minute service. I couldn't believe it. It's like Erev Ramadan, and it's a 15-minute service. But you know what? I hate to be so inwardly judgmental, but they pack more punch into that 15-minute service than we sometimes do in like 2 hours or 3 hours or 4 hours. It's just intensity. And so the length of our service makes it hard to bring intensity. You have to manage how you bring intensity to your own tefillah. There are moments where you're just going to be resting or kind of thinking about your life, and another moment where you're joining in, and you kind of have to manage your own experience. And also, one can build intensity, but that's why there's a lot of singing. One of the reasons I like the nigunim, right, the songs where you're going 999, there's no words, is because they help build intensity and focus. And when you do that, then you feel the intensity and the focus for a period afterwards, right? If you sing a melody and you're into it, that's the power of them, that connection stays with you for 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and then you sing another one. And then that's part of, how Jewish prayer should be worked, to keep moments of creating intensity and focus inside. And Ruby says, 2021 has been a painful year for me. What I've done is engage more in prayer. Can somebody read me the end of that message?
It's Elizabeth. 2021 has been a painful year for me. What I've done is engage more in prayer. I've brought my raw pain, numbness, everything to prayer. When you bring your whole self to God, he can meet you even in the darkest place.
Well, it's the deepest prayer is probably a prayer that comes from when you're at the bottom. When everything is great, your prayer can be powerful, but it's not so deep. But when everything is going bad, as we were saying earlier, then your prayer is very, very deep, because you've got nowhere else to turn to, and then that's when our faith is the most kindled. And it's that the prayer, and we have those prayers in Judaism. We have those prayers that are coming from the depths. From the depths, I call out to you, right? We have that. That's a psalm. From the depths, I call out to you. Prayer is like a meditation. As your thoughts come up, you can observe them and move on from them, right? Prayer is like a meditation. You observe them, you're in the flow. And Jewish prayer is meant as a meditation. We'll get into that some other time too. It was looked at that way. Anybody else? Challenges of Jewish prayer before we move on?
I was going to say that I like our prayer book because of what's written in the margins.
Yes.
is different than anything I've ever had before. And so I try each time to read at least one thing. Obviously, you got to follow the service, but to read at least one new thing and learn something.
It's amazing. It's amazing that the prayer book, that it has so many comments that are not only informational, but inspirational. So it's nice to have both, right? If you wanted to learn more about it, you can learn more about it. If you want to find something that's inspiring and it gives you something, you can read it. So we have this great tool. It really is a great tool. And as I was saying before, if prayer is like freeze-dried coffee, and all you have to do is pour your hot water, the book is helping us a lot. Now we really have to do is, what's the hot water? The hot water is our devotion, right? It's what's inside our hearts. And so you do need the tools so that you're not overwhelmed or confused or having a hard time in the moment, because then you don't feel like bringing hot water. So if you bring hot water, and you feel comfortable enough in the service that you feel connected to it, then you can even bring your own sweetener, and that makes your coffee sweet as well. So I think that's what we're trying to do, and part of what we're trying to do in this course. Maybe one last image before we go back to our final two texts. Sometimes people easily get overwhelmed and they feel, I've got to go through these 100 pages or more on the high holidays. I've got to know everything I'm doing. And you know what? It's even the Talmud says you don't need to do that. And there's a beautiful story in the Talmud of a shepherd who had this beautiful prayer where he's just speaking directly to God. And God thought it was just what a wonderful prayer it was. And suddenly this very learned rabbi came and said, no, you're doing it all wrong. You have to do it this way and that way and this way and that way. And so the shepherd eventually got so confused and he just stopped praying because he didn't know how to do it the way he was supposed to. And finally God, appeared to the shepherd in the dream and said, what did you do? You ruined the shepherd's prayer. He had a beautiful prayer to me and you confused him and made his prayer. So I think that, simple prayer is good. And, when Moses is trying to pray for his sister, he just says, El na rafan Allah, please heal her, right? that's enough. If you say, please heal her with all of your intentionality, forget like the 5-page Mishaberach, you know, it's just as powerful or more powerful. This is what we're trying to do with this course, is trying to help find all the ways to get beyond the challenges to meet the goals of prayer that we were talking about, right? To meet all those challenges as best we can. And the last one we didn't talk about is, what if you don't believe in the words of the prayer? And I would just say, if you don't believe in the words of the prayer, there's still things you can do. You can, what I call, transmute the words of the prayer. Transmuting a prayer means, if it means something that you're not quite sure, you somehow just take the intention behind it, because probably it was written in a very different context. And in your mind, you say, when I read that prayer, really what it means for me is this. And, you know, when the prayer says, thank you, God, for making a rooster who can tell the difference between day and night. I was at a farm last weekend, and I was not happy when with my family, when the rooster was, you know, crowing at 5 a.m. I was not saying, thank you, God, for making a rooster. For me, when I read that prayer, I think, thank you, God, for making a world where there's day and night, where I can tell the difference between good and evil, where there's we have discernment and wisdom. And so, you know, we can build individual relationship with each prayer to see what it means to us. And I think that's, in some ways, once you've done that, you've owned the prayer book. The prayer book is yours. And it takes a lot of time. But if you can do that with all the key prayers, make them, what is it saying to you? How do you transmute it into your words? And you get both the power of the ancient, and you get also the modern meaning. Because why do we use these ancient prayers? In my mind, because once you start changing prayers, they don't have the same spiritual power. And also, at least in the conservative movement, you do it very carefully, because once you get rid of a prayer, it's very hard to bring it back. And sometimes in one generation, nobody likes it, but the next generation they do, and try to bring it back. People have forgotten it, people don't know it, and then it's gone forever. So we're very careful in the conservative movement, at least, what we do with prayer. So what I want to do now to conclude is go back to our sources and read the last two sources, just to give us a taste of what prayer, how our tradition imagines prayer should be. Norma, do you mind reading for us Babylonian Talmud?
When Rabbi Akiva was with the congregation, he would pray quickly so as not to be a burden on those praying with him, who would respectfully wait for him to finish. But when he prayed alone, one could leave him in one corner and afterwards find him in another corner due to how many bows and prostrations.
Right? He was so into his prayer that you found he started over there and he finished on the other side of the room because he was so full of emotion. And I'd like to conclude with the next prayer. Norma, do you mind continuing?
It was a Rosh Chodesh, the day of the celebration of the new moon. The morning prayers began in the same way as any other prayer service. The Baal Shem Tov entered the synagogue and went to his place among the worshipers, and the reader recited the first blessings. Suddenly, the Baal Shem began to tremble, but this too was nothing new. The spiritual current that ran through the Rabbi during davening prayer would often cause a slight quiver in his body. Today, however, the Baal Shem was shaking fiercely from head to toe. When it came time for the Baal Shem to leave his place and go to the front of the synagogue and lead the prayers, he remained motionless at his place, immobilized by the intensity of his inner state. When one of the Hasidim approached the Baal Shem to try and help him, he saw that the Rebbe's face was glowing like the sun. His eyes, two giant orbs staring off into empty space. Another Hasid stepped forward to aid the master. Together, the two Hasidim guided the Baal Shem to the reader's desk. For a long time, he just stood there motionless. Then, in a quavering voice, the Baal Shem started to recite the prayers as his body shook and trembled. He continued chanting out loud until he finished Hallel, the special prayers of praise, and the reader's Kaddish. Now the Baal Shem withdrew inward once again. While his mood soared in the heavens, his body continued to shake and shudder. Finally, his body grew still. His face returned to its normal appearance, and the Baal Shem opened his eyes. The Hasidim then continued on with the service, reading from the Torah scroll and completing the rest of the morning prayers without incident. It was a Rosh Chodesh like no other before or after.
Thank you.
Whoa.
Intense, you know, so we're,
Yes.
we don't need that level of intensity all the time. It's nice to have more intensity, to feel so moved and to feel such power. And so this begins our journey into prayer. And I hope that you all will continue to join us and get something out of our course over the next year. And I hope to see you all soon. Thank you for joining me.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a nice day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.